Hey there. I thought that I would walk you all through my process for some of the pages that I completed in my memory trip album. This first spread is focusing on our trip to Magic Kingdom, and it actually centers on the photos that I took during the Main Street Parade. I think that's what it's called. Well, anyway, as you can see, I had already pulled the photos that I wanted to use for this particular spread, and it was actually pretty easy to make those decisions because I had already separated my photos into the various parks that we visited. And before I actually started putting my album together, I made a list of how many stories I wanted to tell and roughly how many pages I wanted to spend doing it. My traveler's notebook had a total of 52 pages. And so at first I was really intimidated by that. And I was like, how in the world am I ever going to fill up 52 pages? Well, it was not hard to do at all, as you will see. But this was one of the first layouts that I did. And I essentially had 5 photos. I had 4 photos of the various characters who were in the parade, and then I had 1 photo of my daughter from that day that I also wanted to make sure to include. Now remember, I'm using the Traveler's Notebook from the Stamp Spot in Australia that has a plain piece of white paper on one side and then a pocket page on the other side. And initially I thought that it would be best to limit my patterned paper to the pocket page because, I just wasn't sure how that would all work out on the white page. Well, as I work my way through my book, I will change that up some, but that was just sort of my thinking at this point. What you can see here is that I'm going through my stack of papers that I already pre-cut. Those are from that summer collection by October Afternoon. And then I also decided to go back and to cut some pieces that would fit in this Traveler's Notebook from some Felicity Jane papers that I had because I loved them so much and I liked the black and white graphic nature of them. And I think that there are a couple of I think there are probably a couple of other random papers, but I couldn't tell you what manufacturers they even are right now. Sorry about that. Well, anyway, you can see that I ultimately decided on the multicolor chevron. And I liked that because these colors were so vibrant, so colorful. These photos were so vibrant, so colorful that I felt like they could stand up to a busy pattern like that. And I liked the idea of being able to pull some color in, especially on that right hand side. I did have to trim my photos up just a little bit, and I'll be honest, I didn't even measure them. I basically just eyeballed it to make sure that they would fit, and then you might have seen that I was using one to make sure that the next one was the same width and that sort of thing. I very rarely actually measure things that I cut. I know that some of you all are probably horrified by that, but it's just one of those things I feel like I can get it close enough just by taking a good look at it. And if not, I can always print another picture or cut it a little bit of a different size. I'm not going to stress out too terribly much about that kind of thing. Ultimately, I decided to put my photos on the right-hand side of that particular side of the spread, and I just sort of stacked them all in a row. I included some washi tape to draw some attention to the middle photo because I thought it was kind of interesting, and also to make sure that my edges were exactly right. Of course, since I didn't measure it, they weren't exactly right, and I could have gotten all stressed out and upset about that, but I didn't. I just decided to use a little piece of washi tape there to make it look like all that had been planned. I wanted to use just a scotch of that pattern on the other side of the page, maybe to do something to kind of bring the whole layout together, have some continuity. And so I decided to cut a couple of little flags and to layer those under the photos on the left. And I thought that was a good way to bring in just a touch of color on that other side, but not to try to do too much. And Ordinarily, I never get the angles right or anything like that, but this particular paper already had the lines that I could follow, and so I was like, okay, so this will be good. I have heard that there's a way that you can do little tails with a corner rounder, or maybe it's with a square punch. I saw somebody do that in like a YouTube video, and so that's something I want to try eventually, but I didn't try it here. I also played around a little bit with which photo I wanted at the top of the left-hand side and which photo I wanted at the bottom. And my final decision maker was that Kelsey was really the focus of this whole trip. She's the reason that I'm documenting the trip. And so since I thought she was the most important piece of information on the page, I decided to go ahead and put her picture at the top left and to use that little flag that I cut to draw attention to that photo. So that was kind of my thought process there. You can also see that I am cutting one of those strips from an Ellie's Studio cut apart sheet, and sometimes I use my paper trimmer for that, but for these little ones, the ones that don't go all the way across, I prefer to just use my scissors. Again, I know that that's not necessarily going to get me like the most perfect edge, but that's okay. I mean, one of the things that I love about scrapbooking is that it does have that handmade touch, and to me that gives me some permission not to worry about being perfect all of the time. That's just like way too much pressure. And if you all listen to the podcast and you know me very well, you know that totally fits in with my personality in general. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did in this particular album was to make sure that I used my supplies liberally. Like sometimes I'm not a minimalist, that wouldn't be the right way to put it, but sometimes I don't use as many supplies as maybe I should because I think a page is finished, and then I'll go back and I'll kind of question whether it truly feels finished or not, even though I rarely go back and do anything extra to it later. And so I was cognizant of that fact as I worked through this album. I was like, don't feel like, I have to stop the first time I think it's done. Like, it's okay if I want to go through and I want to play with that some. It's okay if I want to, maybe do a little more than I ordinarily would. And that's something that, that if you have a tendency to be that way, then you might want to make kind of a conscious effort. On the other hand, if you're somebody who throws everything you own on a page and then later on you're not happy with it, then that could be something that you're aware of and that you work on as well. So you can see in this part of the video, I'm playing around with a pocket scrapbooking card because I realized that I wanted to have some journaling on the page, but I hadn't really left any room for it. And, it's probably not some people's preference to slip journaling behind pages or behind photos, but it's something that I do very frequently, not because I'm necessarily trying to hide the journaling, but because sometimes I forget to leave space for it. It's like I didn't plan it out well ahead. And I'm not somebody who generally plans out my particular layouts before I work on them. I'll have kind of a picture in my head or an idea or something I want to try, but I don't usually sketch them out. Now, I have before, and I think that does work well. I just want to get right into the matter of playing with my supplies, so that's the thing that keeps me from doing too much planning. I've kind of convinced myself that if I plan too much, that will take more work and kind of suck the joy out of the process, and I absolutely do not want that to happen. For me, the real joy in scrapbooking is being able to play with my supplies and to enjoy that creative process. So, a lot of working ahead is just not going to work. You can also see, and I don't know, if this matters to some of you or not, but I do use adhesive kind of liberally. I'm using a tape runner that I bought at Hobby Lobby. I think it is a permanent tape, but it's not the squares. It's like the continuous tape runner, and I like it, even though it is permanent. When you first stick it down, it's repositionable. Like, does that make sense? And so I'm not shy about using however much adhesive I want to. And, some people like really conserve that kind of thing, but I don't worry about that so much. I just figure that that's a consumable item and that I'm always going to have to buy more, and I'm just not going to freak out about it. I also, you can see that I chose kind of a title. So like I decided to put what would serve as the title right underneath that primary photo of Kelsey, again, because I want to draw attention to her. That's really, I think, the focus of my page. And I have to consistently work at not always putting the most important thing on the top left. It's just a habit I have, probably from years of reading newspapers and magazines, and that's just, how we read English. We start at the top left and then work our way to the right and down the page. And so I went ahead and I added that label there because I wanted to draw some attention to her. And then on the right-hand side of the spread, I did include 3 embellishments there that they touch the pictures, and they're pretty evenly spaced in the middle of the page because I felt like that provided some unity, and it also gave me a place to use my embellishments. Let's be real. You can see that I'm writing out my journaling card there, and I don't script what I'm going to write ahead of time. I just kind of do it on the fly. Maybe that's because I'm a big talker. It never seems like I run out of things to say. And if I feel like I'm running out of room, I can do one of 2 things. I can do what I did here on the card and just flip to the back, with an arrow that's like, okay, continue reading on the back. Or I can always rephrase what it is that I plan to say towards the end of my journaling and, maybe use different words or fewer words to do that. My handwriting is certainly not perfect, but I do like my handwriting, and I think that Kelsey and perhaps her children will treasure having so many examples of my handwriting someday. At least, that's what I tell myself. That's what I hope will happen. So I'm finishing up the writing there, and as I begin to put the pocket scrapbook card, get ready to put it behind that page, I realized I need something that will keep it from falling in. I realize I need something that will keep it sticking up. And I tried a couple of different things, and they really aren't the best options. They aren't bulky enough to really keep them. So ultimately, what I decide to do is for the page that goes behind this page on in the page protector, I actually go ahead and adhere it to this page up until the point where I want to be able to slip in the card, and then that way the adhesive basically serves to stop it from wiggling on down and getting lost. So that's what I ultimately decide to do, but I don't think that actually shows up in this video, so I wanted to mention it to you. I had a lot of fun using some puffy stickers in this book. I also used lots of flat stickers, and I used enamel dots, and I used several different cut apart sheets, and I really enjoyed that. I also tried to repeat the number 4 periodically in my layouts for this album because we took this trip when Kelsey was 4 years old, and so that's kind of a subtle nod to that. I don't know that anybody would even notice that, if I hadn't pointed it out, but I thought it might be worth mentioning. So here is my final spread. You can see that the journaling card comes out, and I feel pretty good about it. I'm excited about